Ray Delgado was 11 years old the last time he ever heard Louis Armstrong play the trumpet. And for the rest of his life, whenever somebody picked up a horn to fool around at a wedding or a wake, he would have to look away. Because what he heard that evening on 107th Street wasn't a rehearsal, and it wasn't a favor for a neighbor's birthday. It was the last of Louis Armstrong's strength, spent on people who never could have bought a ticket to it. And when it ended, nobody on that block ever heard him play again. Corona, Queens, June 25, 1971, 6:40 in the evening, 11 days before Louis Armstrong died in his sleep. To understand what happened on the sidewalk outside 34 to 56 107th Street, you have to go back 6 weeks first, to a hospital bed at Beth Israel, and a promise Louis Armstrong had already broken twice. The house at 34 to 56 107th Street was a modest 2-story brick, no different from its neighbors, except for the crowd that sometimes gathered on the sidewalk in front of it. Louis and Lucille Armstrong had lived there since 1943, long before Hello, Dolly and What a Wonderful World, back when he was just the trumpet player who'd bought a house in Corona because nobody in Manhattan would sell to a black man with money, however much money he had. He could have moved anywhere in the world by 1971. Beverly Hills would have taken him. Paris would have taken him. He stayed on 107th Street until the day he died. The neighborhood never treated him like a star, and that was exactly why he loved it. Kids rang his doorbell for nickels and got them. Teenagers borrowed his driveway for stickball when the street traffic got bad. Louis sat on his own front stoop most summer evenings in an undershirt, waving at anybody who passed, same as any other man on the block who'd worked hard his whole life and finally had a porch to sit on. Ray lived 4 doors down, in a 3rd-floor walk-up with his mother, his father, and 2 younger sisters. His father, Hector, drove a forklift at a loading dock on Northern Boulevard, and had been laid off that April, and the Delgado apartment had gone quiet in a way Ray didn't have words for yet. Quiet at dinner. Quiet when the mail came. Quiet in a way that made an 11-year-old feel responsible for something he had no power to fix. He kept a battered old cornet under his bed, bought for $2 at a church rummage sale the previous fall. And some afternoons, he'd sneak into the alley behind the building and try to coax a tune out of it. It never came out right. The other kids on the block had heard him try. They'd laughed, the way kids do, without meaning much by it, and meaning everything by it at the same time. Ray hadn't touched the cornet in 3 weeks. Louis had been in the hospital since March, and every kid on 107th Street knew it. Mrs. Armstrong kept the porch light on anyway, every single night, like a promise he was coming back to. "He's tired," Lucille told the neighbors who asked. "The doctors want him quiet, just quiet." Louis Armstrong had never once in his life been quiet. He came home in mid-May, thinner than the block remembered him, walking slower than the block remembered him. The cardiologist had been direct. No horn. Not for practice, not for a photograph, not for a single bar. His heart couldn't take the pressure it took to blow a trumpet, and everyone around him, Lucille, his manager, the specialists, had made him agree to it out loud twice before they'd let him leave the hospital. He broke the promise within a week. Quietly, upstairs, with the door shut, into one of the reel-to-reel tape recorders he'd kept running in that house for over 20 years, recording dinner conversations, radio broadcasts, his own trumpet practice, anything. All of it stacked on shelves in decorated boxes he labeled himself. It was the one form of playing his doctors couldn't see him do. Lucille found out and said nothing. She'd been married to him for almost 30 years. She knew by now what silence would actually cost him, and she'd rather argue with a cardiologist than with the only thing that had ever made her husband feel like himself. Through June, the decline came in stages, the way it does. One flight of stairs left him breathless. Then 2 flights left him breathless. Then he stopped trying the stairs at all, and took to sitting by the open window of the front room where he could watch 107th Street without anyone watching him back. He still dressed most mornings like he had somewhere to be. Pressed shirt, combed through what was left of his hair, even on the days he never made it past that window. That's where he was on the evening of June 25th, when he heard the stickball game start up outside, and heard, underneath it, something else. A boy, alone near the stoop, trying to play a cornet and stopping every few notes, like he expected to get laughed at before he'd even finished the phrase. Ray hadn't meant for anyone to hear him. He'd only picked the cornet back up because his father had come home that afternoon and said, low and tired, that there might not be rent money in July. Ray didn't know what else to do with the feeling in his chest, so he'd gone to the alley, the same as always, and tried the same 3 notes he never got right. Not one note landed clean, he said, years later in a 2015 interview with a Queen's Oral History Project. I figured nobody was listening. I figured nobody ever was. Somebody was. Upstairs, at the window, Louis Armstrong sat forward in his chair. Lucille asked him what was wrong. He didn't answer at first. He just kept listening to a boy 4 doors down fail, over and over, at the exact same phrase Louis himself had failed at on a cold morning in New Orleans 60 years before, in a home for wayward boys where somebody had finally handed him a cornet of his own. "Get my horn," he said. "Louis," Lucille's voice had the doctor's warning in it. "Get my horn, Lucille." Not loud, just certain. "This one won't cost me anything the other ones didn't already." By the time Louis Armstrong came down the front steps of 34 to 56 107th Street, the stickball game had already stopped. Word moves fast on a block like that. Someone had run to tell a mother, who told another mother, who called across a fire escape to a third. 10 kids, then 20, gathered on the sidewalk and the stoops on either side, some of them still holding the broomstick bat, nobody saying much of anything. A few of the older teenagers hung back by the corner, trying to look like they hadn't run the whole way over. He didn't sit. He stood on the bottom step in his shirt sleeves, holding the trumpet case he hadn't opened in over a month, and he found Ray in the crowd without having to look very hard. "Come here, son." Ray came. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. "You know what a false start is?" Louis asked him. "No, sir." "It's when you stop because you think you're supposed to. Everybody who ever got good at anything had about 1,000 of them." He opened the case. "Now watch this one. It ain't gonna be false." He lifted the horn, the doctor's warning, the 6 weeks of silence, the reel-to-reel tapes recorded behind closed doors, all of it in his hands at once, and he played. Not a full song, not even close to what he could do in 1928 or 1956, or on the record that had knocked the Beatles off the charts 7 years earlier. 4 bars, maybe 8, a phrase from When the Saints Go Marching In, slow, unsteady in a couple of spots, and then gone. It didn't matter that it was short. Nobody on 107th Street ever forgot the sound of it. For a few seconds after he lowered the horn, nobody on the sidewalk moved. Then somebody's mother started clapping. And then everybody was clapping, kids and parents both. And Louis Armstrong stood there on his own front step, breathing hard, and smiled the smile that had been on magazine covers on 4 continents. He looked back at Ray. "Your turn." "I can't play it like that, Mr. Armstrong." "Didn't ask you to play it like that. Asked you to play it like you." Ray lifted the $2 cornet to his mouth in front of 20 kids who'd laughed at him 3 weeks earlier. And this time, nobody laughed. He got through the first 4 notes clean. Then his lip gave out, and the 5th one cracked wide open, ugly and loud. Louis Armstrong laughed, not at him, with him, and put a hand on his shoulder. "See there," he said. "You already sound like a trumpet player. Trumpet players miss notes in front of people. That's the whole job." That's when it happened. The moment Ray Delgado, 40-some years later, would still call the reason he never fully put the horn down, not once for the rest of his life. Lucille came down the steps and took Louis gently by the arm. He went back inside without an argument. He was too tired to give her one. 11 days after that evening, on the morning of July 6, 1971, Louis Armstrong died in his sleep in the upstairs bedroom of the house on 107th Street. He was 69 years old. Lucille was the one who found him. The doctors said his heart had simply stopped, the way they'd warned it eventually would. The news reached the block before noon. Neighbors said afterward that the street went unnaturally quiet that whole day. No stickball, no radios on the stoops, no kids on the corner. Nothing. A milkman making his usual rounds said he could hear traffic from the boulevard 2 streets over, something nobody on 107th Street had ever been able to hear before. Ray's mother told him the news standing in their kitchen doorway, and he went straight to his room and took out the cornet and just held it without playing a single note. He didn't touch it again for almost a year. Thousands came to view him lying in state at the 7th Regiment Armory on Park Avenue, filing past for hours in a line that wrapped the block. Governors and mayors sent their condolences. Ella Fitzgerald sang the Lord's Prayer at the funeral, her voice breaking halfway through it. None of it, Ray said later, meant as much to him as 4 bars played on a front step for a boy nobody important would ever have noticed. "They keep saying he gave the world, 'What a wonderful world,'" Ray told the interviewer in 2015. "He gave me 8 bars on a Tuesday night when I was ready to quit something I hadn't even started yet." The house at 34 to 56 107th Street still stands. Lucille lived there until her own death in 1983, and today it operates as the Louis Armstrong House Museum. The front room preserved almost exactly as it was, the same low ceilings, the same window looking out over the same stoop, the shelves of reel-to-reel tapes still catalogued in Louis's own handwriting. Visitors from 6 continents walk through that front room every year, and almost none of them know to look at the window and picture a sick man sitting there, listening for a boy's cornet instead of resting the way he'd promised to. Ray Delgado kept playing. He never became famous. He played trumpet in a church band in Corona for over 50 years, married, raised 2 sons of his own on that same stretch of Queens, and taught more than a dozen neighborhood kids to hold a horn properly, the same patient way it had once been shown to him on a front step by a man with 11 days left to live. When he talked about that June evening decades later to anyone who'd sit still long enough to listen, he always ended the story the same way. People ask me what he sounded like at the end, weaker than he'd ever been. Ray would shake his head. Wrong question. Ask what it sounded like to a kid who thought nobody was listening. That's the part that never left me. The stoop is still there too, worn smooth by 70 years of Corona kids sitting on the steps of a house that never once locked its door to them. Some evenings, neighbors say, if a car backfires just right down on 107th Street, for half a second, it almost sounds like an old trumpet catching a note it was never going to hold, and holding it anyway, one more time, for whoever happened to be listening. If this story moved you, take a moment to subscribe and leave a like. It helps us keep these old memories alive. Have you ever watched someone push past what they were told they couldn't do anymore, just to give one more thing to somebody who needed it? Tell us about it in the comments.